Whatever.
Hey.
Calling Chris Anderson.
Yes.
Right? Chris
Yes,
Anderson.
that's the last time I checked.
Yeah. Where you be, Chris?
Well, I'm back in Studio W1. I've cleaned up my daughter's mess, and now you're seeing it with
the walls. What you had to repaint? It was so bad.
It was, yeah. So this is going to be the new look. Once pictures and eventually other things, but this is a step in the right direction.
Oh, fantastic!
And you're still in Chicago.
I am still in high above Chicago's Michigan Avenue.
Han hasn't moved at all.
No, I haven't even touched him in we haven't had any of our sessions. No, skipping that. Hey, welcome everybody to History Happy Hour, and thank you to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for their assistance in bringing you this show, and for somehow having both Chris and I in our home environments today. That's a pretty amazing coincidence. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at StephenAmbroseTours.com. And Chris, whether people are watching live or watching on replay or listening to the HHH podcast, welcome. And today we'll be talking about the Coronado expedition of 1540.
Yes.
So, and the native reaction to same. Thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. And I want to especially thank our Top Shelf supporters who are listed here. And you can become a Top Shelf supporter by going to patreon.com/historyhappyhour.
That's where all the cool kids hang out.
That is where the cool kids are hanging out. Who are some of the cool kids who are here with us today?
Yeah, well, Jack Sadler has joined us, and Harold Boltz, Ken from Kansas, David Picker from Philadelphia. Wally's back. Hey, Wally, how are you doing?
Fantastic.
He said hello to Doreen, so I'm assuming Doreen is here too. So.
Okay, excellent. Well, and I know that Marilyn said she was going to watch this show, so I assume that if she's not there, she'll be there soon. So, because she was quite fascinated by the book when she picked it up. So we should get to it. Why don't you give me a cue, and I will bring in the open.
The bar is open.
The bar's open. Chris, what is up today?
What? We're joined this week by Peter Stark. Peter is an adventurer and historian. He is the author of Astoria, John Jacob Astor, and Thomas Jefferson's Lost Pacific Empire, a New York Times bestseller, and a PEN American Literary Award finalist. Former correspondent for Outside Magazine, Stark has also been published in Smithsonian, The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, and Men's Journals.
Oh, it's pretty impressive.
I know. I see. I have to keep looking down like this so I don't miss any of this stuff. But his other books include The Young Washington, which I'm sure you have read, How Wilderness and War Forged America's Founding Father, and it's a finalist for the George Washington Book Prize, which made my wife very happy. But Peter is joining us this week to talk about his new book, The Lost Cities of El Norte, Coronado's Quest, The Unconquered West, and the Birth of American Indian Resistance.
Peter Stark, welcome to History Happy Hour.
Great to be here. I'm so delighted to be on History Happy Hour and see both of you guys, Rick and Chris.
Well, and Chris left out the most important part of your bio.
Oh, here we go. He was jumping on that.
I know he was.
I want to know. I want to mention this. So everybody out in History Happy Hour land, Peter and Rick were at Dartmouth together. And Peter was the guy that locked Rick in the locker and gym, and he's never really gotten over it.
I'm really still not recovered.
I was hoping he was still in there, but
Peter and I were at Dartmouth together, but we didn't know each other at Dartmouth, so we just figured this out. Peter is I'm shaming him. He's 2 years older than me, and you look it also.
I'll admit to that. But I think I've heard Rick's voice on the college radio station.
There you go.
Yeah, all right.
It's a uniquely annoying voice, so I'm sure that is a memory that would stick with you.
It grabbed attention all over campus whenever he was on air.
Sure.
So did you bring a drink with you today, Mr. Stark?
Well, I've got in honor of Chris, see if I can pour it on my computer, an Imperial pint of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale.
Well done, sir. Well done. And
How about
Rick?
you, Mr.
Cheers.
Anderson?
Happy hour.
No,
Wow, right.
I don't know why I'm
I
just
got-
calling everybody Mister today. Okay, you got the scotch there.
Falkirk 12. Yeah.
I'm just having a Hopwell
Oh,
beer
yeah.
in my Luxembourg glass,
Nice.
Your Luxembourg. Does
I-
it say
which I-
what?
which I bought in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I was going to say. All right.
Go ahead.
On the brass tacks here. Your book is about an expedition in 1540 that traverses 2,500 miles of unmapped terrain, ranging from the modern states of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. And it's just breathtaking. And quite frankly, in reading your book, it makes the Lewis and Clark expedition look like a Boy Scout camping weekend in the backyard. So
Everything went right for them.
So tell us, what expedition is this, and how did you kind of decide to tell this story?
Well, the expedition at 1540, it's coming up from Mexico City. And at that point, Mexico City had only been conquered by the Spaniards. It was the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. The Spaniards had only conquered it 20 years before. And, they'd essentially, this is, Cortez, he hits this big pot of gold, so to speak, in capturing this huge empire of the Aztecs with, much wealth and much lands and many, many serfs to work the lands. And then a few years later, the conquistador Pizarro hits an actual pot of gold in the Andes when he captures the Incan emperor and ransoms him for an entire room full of gold filled to the ceiling. And there are actual measurements of this room, and it's not small. And plus 2 more the same size of silver. And then he kills the emperor and he melts down the gold and sends it off in gold bars. So that happened in 1533. I think I got that right. And so now we're in Mexico City, which is now the new capital. It's turning into this colonial capital of New Spain. And, there are a lot of ambitious young men around there, and there's a viceroy trying to bring it under control. And in 1536, this rumor comes to Mexico City that there are 7 very wealthy cities to the north, maybe even cities of gold. And, it makes perfect sense in Mexico City. There's this big, rooms full of gold down in the Andes, and they're sitting on, all this Aztec wealth at the time, the Spaniards are. And so, why not? Why wouldn't there be something up north? Well, one of the problems is they have absolutely no idea what's up north. Zero. And, when you see those, they're sort of sometimes made in fun, but old maps, old charts that have dragons, big blank spots, and they're filled with dragons. Well, that was literally on the map of the time. It was like beasts and dragons and, random stuff, everything in the north. It was just a complete blank.
Right.
And they even have a note out there in this blankness. We think the emperor of China lives here. And, this is sort of north of Mexico. And so that's how much they knew. And they called it El Norte Misterioso, the mysterious north.
Mhm.
So there's a long backstory that we don't necessarily have to go into now, but this Coronado is from Spain. He's a second son of aristocrats, but as a second son, he doesn't have any real holdings, and which is true of many of these Spanish conquistadors, that they were second sons of noble or aristocratic families, but they didn't, they got kind of like a title, but the older son got all the land, the castles, everything else. So these young men started going off to the New World to strike their fame and fortune. And, Cortez was one, and, you hear about many others. And Coronado was one of these guys. So he was, but there's a distinction here that I'd like to point out, that a lot of these second son conquistadors were born in Extremadura, which is far western Spain, and it is really dry and hard scrabble to this day. It's remote, dry, hard scrabble, poor, and so that's where a lot of these guys, these hardcore conquistadores, came from. Well, Coronado was born and raised in Salamanca, which is one of the best seats of learning in all of Europe. And so I say, and he's there, kind of among the gardens and the libraries and the scholars. So I kind of compare it like most of these guys were from the equivalent of Appalachia,
right?
And Coronado was from the equivalent of Oxford. So he came from a different mindset.
Right.
Part of the story, he came from like a less hardcore mindset. And that he, as a young man, shows up in 1535, and he's in the company of the viceroy of New Spain, who has been sent by the king of Spain to govern New Spain. And essentially, the big task is to first rein in Cortez, who thinks he owns the place, and then run New Spain. And so Coronado is in the entourage of Viceroy Mendoza, and he's a young man, and he's close to 30. And he, he performs good tasks, does well for Viceroy Mendoza. And Coronado also marries Beatrice, who is 12 years old. And one of the wealthiest women wealthiest people of anybody in New Spain. She has this huge estate that she inherited. And so, they get married, and they start a family. And then this rumor comes in about the 7 golden wealthy cities in the mysterious North. So Viceroy Mendoza is really he's a cool guy. I mean, he's a really sort of in Spanish colonial history, he's kind of he's kind of cautious, and he sends out a reconnaissance party up north, and it's formed of a Moorish slave, Esteban, and a Franciscan friar, Fray Marcos, and they go north for like 6 months. And they come back, and Esteban's no longer with the expedition. But Fray Marcos says, yeah, there's 7 wealthy cities up there, confirms this rumor. And Mexico City goes wild. And everybody wants to hop on board this, it's like a venture capital today. It's like an IPO, that they're sure to find massive wealth up in the north. And so people want to invest in it. They want to accompany it. And this huge expedition gets put together. Of 2,000 Aztecan ally warriors, about 400 Spanish, armored knight-looking guys on horseback. Any number, a lot of Spaniards, a lot of armed Spaniards, a lot of them on horseback, and and probably 1,000 or more like staff. This huge thing's put together, and Viceroy Mendoza asked Coronado to lead it. And Coronado's now he's in his early 30s, I believe. And there's one big problem. You're, as a leader of the expedition, you're expected to invest in it, to fund this expedition, which is really expensive. It's like sending, really, it's kind of like colonizing Mars, because they're trying to colonize the North, not only conquer it, but colonize it. So the problem is Coronado doesn't have any money to invest in the expedition. But what he does have is he has his teenage bride Beatrice's estates. So he mortgages the estates. Essentially, he borrows all the money from Beatrice, who has a very businesslike mother, Coronado's mother-in-law. And that's how Coronado buys his way into this expedition and starts leading it north. So that's kind of the backstory to all.
Sure. So they are going to run into native populations that have never seen a European before. And you've tried really hard in this book to not just tell it from the point of view of the Spanish conquistadors, but also from the point of view of the natives. So how are these civilizations different from what we might imagine, and how hard was it to sort of put together their side of the story?
In researching and writing the book, are you saying?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good question from a historical point of view, and there there's what's kind of wonderful about this story is there's so many Spanish accounts, very detailed Spanish accounts. Um, in part because they were ordered to by the crown, and in part because some people kept journals or wrote memoirs, and in part because there was an investigation of Coronado when he returned, investigating whether he had abused the native people. And so, there's an entire book this thick of testimony from participants in that expedition about exactly what happened at certain moments. And, they're sworn, however they're sworn to tell the truth. So you get not only kind of the chronicler's reports and sort of the polished version of these events that the chroniclers wrote and that Coronado wrote in letters to the king and the viceroy. But then you get, it's like Spaniards who have to take the stand and testify, probably at the risk of their life, testify truthfully what happened in these various situations. So that's one way to get that. It was easier to get a lot of like the details of action of what was going on in these interactions. I mean, like the kind of the plot of the interactions. But of course, there's no native recorded written of what happened. There's some oral histories, but they're quite non-specific. But what's really helpful was to understand, I tried to learn as much as I could about these native cultures. And we're talking his first stop, so to speak, and there's a whole crazy story there. His first stop was essentially the Southwest and the Puebloan cultures of the Southwest, Zuni, New Mexico, which today is still a very vibrant Zuni community and very remote. And so I spent a lot of time going to like Zuni and places like that and talking with people who were Puebloan and, reading about Puebloan culture and just really absorbing myself in the story. And it really becomes obvious at a certain point that there was a whole lot going on behind the scenes, what the Puebloan people were doing. And so, the Spaniards are like completely clueless with what's going on behind the scenes. But it's really easy or not difficult from this distance and with all this material and with, starting to understand the native culture. It's not difficult to put together what was going on behind the scenes and how these Puebloans were really messing with his mind and Coronado's mind. I mean, and sometimes literally by throwing boulders on his head.
They'll do it.
And that, you can just see these strategies they're working out. And, what's so amazing to me as I got deeper into the story and learned more about the story and more about the Puebloan cultures, they're in New Mexico, I think there are 21 different Puebloan peoples, and many have their own languages, different pueblos, different locations, and many are very intact today. I mean, I think all 21 are, and some more traditional than others, but they're ruled. They're not ruled. There's no ruler. There's no headman. There's nothing like that. There's no king. They're run by councils of elders, and the whole system of governance is very consensus based. And so what really confused the Spaniards is they marched into this into this world that they had no idea it existed. They had no idea anything about it. And the first thing they did is they're looking around for the emperor. They're looking around for the castle. They're looking around for the huge, Aztecan pyramid, or the Peruvian the Incan temples. And there's nothing like that. And they can't even find like a head guy. They can't even find a head guy to talk to. Like, there's no one person. And so what's really happening is, behind the scenes, these various pueblos, I'm sure, and there's some evidence of this, and some of it's partly speculation on my part, but it's very obvious. There's a lot of communication between these different pueblos across hundreds of miles about how to handle this dude. And they come up with a very effective system of handling him ultimately, even though there's a lot of violence in between.
Yeah, Peter, I want to pick up on that. Obviously some of this is going to be conjectural, but I'm going to confess to say that when I first learned about the conquistadors, it was not really a story that gripped me that much, because, in my reading of the conquistadors go to Latin America, the Aztecs and the Incas are there, and like, who are you? And they get hit over the head, they're eradicated, and then we move on from there. But and especially in reading this book, it's a lot more complex. There's a lot more going on, and one of the things I want to keep talking about is this idea: how much communication are there between indigenous people saying, "Hey, there are these crazy guys that wear really heavy metal suits and they're tromping around all over the place," because you allude in the book to the fact that a lot of these indigenous tribes are talking to one another, and you, in one of your footnotes, you even say that it could be possible that they were aware of Columbus.
Exactly.
So it seems like they're communicating to each other quite a bit, and it's actually the Spaniards that have no idea what they're doing or where they are.
Really kind of it. I mean, that's true. That there's exactly right in a lot of contexts in the story. That I've been writing about early contact between Europeans and Native peoples in North America for many years, and researching it. And my father was way into frontier history, and I grew up steeped in that world in Wisconsin, growing up in Wisconsin, about the native tribes and the first settlers, and it's become so apparent to me that I think so many Americans today, I mean non-Native Americans, have this idea that, like, okay, there's one Indian tribe over here sitting around a campfire, right, and then 500 miles over here, there's another Indian tribe in the woods sitting around a campfire. And then over here, there's another one. And that there's no communication between them. But in fact, there was so much communication over hundreds and thousands of miles among tribes of North America. And so, to give one example, that a central part of the story is a pueblo in New Mexico that was called Kikuye at the time. And now it's called Pecos. It got a Spanish name much later. It's now a ruin. It's about 20 miles, if that far, east of Santa Fe, up on a mountain ridge, sort of where the Rocky Mountains dip down to the Great Plains. So it was a very strategic spot. And Kikuye was a massive pueblo, massive, and it was on a ridge top, and it was a trade center for hundreds, if not thousands, of miles around. So there would be seashells coming in from the Pacific Ocean, which is, I think it's like 700 miles away, to Kikuye. There'd be buffalo hides coming from the Great Plains, hundreds and hundreds of miles, and buffalo meat, bison meat, dried bison meat. There would be macaw feathers coming up from Mexico, not only Mexico, but like tropical Mexico, these really brightly colored parrot feathers. So, that trade network literally spanned thousands of miles, and it centered on this trade hub called Pecos. And so, there's obviously a lot of communication going on, and these traders, some are just long distance traders. They bring news of what's going on from one place to another. So the footnote that you're alluding to, Chris, is that that there at one point, this is recorded in a chronicler's journal or one of the explorers' journals, that the Zuni people said, we were told 50 years ago that people like you might be coming, and which could allude. I mean, it would be 50 years ago that Columbus arrived.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
so there's a huge amount of communication.
That's crazy.
One of the things that the Spanish are bringing with them, really for the first time into the West, are horses. And so Lynn Hargrove, one of our viewers, has a question. What was the Indians' reaction to seeing horses for the first time?
Complete, bewilderment.
They thought they were like metal dogs, right?
Big metal dogs.
Big metal
Big
dogs.
metal dogs. Because, the size of a horse, if you've never seen one before, it's massive. And, I mean, you can hear about, even if they'd heard about these people, bearded people from the South have big animals, when you actually see a horse, it's a whole, it's big. And they didn't know what to make of them at first. And they didn't know what to make about the guys riding them, who also were wearing armored suits. So pretty early in this story, in this journey of Coronado, this expedition, when there's a certain amount of conflict between Coronado and some of these Pueblos, and then the Puebloans at one point, realize that Coronado has these horses, and they're so powerful that they can just run over warriors. And that's what happened with the Aztecs. Actually, the Spaniards had horses to run over the Aztecs, and the Puebloans are saying, "Wow, these things are so powerful." And one night, when the Spaniards have a big camp with all their horses, it's like a winter camp. The Puebloans, conspire to sneak up, and they break these horses loose. They stampede them out of the pastures or corrals where they're kept, and then they drive them north up to some of their own pueblos. And when one of the Spaniards, party of Spaniards, goes out looking for these horses, the Spaniards come across this pueblo, and look over the walls or whatever, and they see all these horses running in a circle, and Puebloan warriors shooting at them with arrows. And it's like an experiment to see, how do you steer these animals? Can you kill them? It's very much a moment when Puebloans are trying to understand how a horse works, what it is, what it can do. And so, yeah, they were really clueless about just what they could do, even if they'd heard about them.
Yeah. So, Pete, the other thing, again, never even occurred to me, interesting aspect of this book is the involvement of indigenous people with the expedition, right? I always have this image of my head of the conquistadors, or, I'm from New England originally, of the Puritans going out into the woods, and they're having at it with the Native Americans, and there's no,
no other interaction.
Yeah, right. And so, there was a quote in the book that you had. It's no exaggeration to say that the conquest of the Americas during the 16th century, wrote Coronado historians Richard Flint and Shirley Cushing Flint, was essentially the conquest of natives groups by other natives, at least nominally under the direction of Europeans. So can you talk a little bit about sort of that aspect of it? Were you surprised by the native involvement of the Spaniards?
Well, yes. I mean, that in our traditional American history, which is, the versions are, there are always new interpretations, but, grade school and decades ago, you'd hear about the conquistadors and, Spanish, taking the Aztec capital.
Right.
You didn't really hear that much that they had like 5,000 other native warriors with them who were really angry at the Aztecs.
Right.
And so the Spaniards were only like the kind of the tip of this huge army. And they were a good tip because they had, protected by metal, they had horses, they had steel swords and whatnot. So you don't hear about the thousands of native warriors that are backing these conquistadors. And that was true in the case of Cortez and conquering the Aztecs, and very much so in the case of Coronado heading north into the mysterious north to find the 7 cities of gold. He had the Spanish contingent was the minority. It was maybe 350, 400 Spaniards, but, armed, and they were officers, and some were, fully armored. And out of those, 350 and 400 Spaniards, there were something. Now the estimates keep going up. There were 2,000 Aztecan warriors who were allies backing them. And these were serious warriors. Not only they were Aztec, there were other groups that near the Aztecs who were part of this too. But these guys are like trained warriors, and they they have these like face masks and feathers, and they're painted, and they have these swords. They call them macana, and they're like a very refined metal slab of wood, like a club, but they're embedded with these sharp points of obsidian, which are razor sharp. I mean, it's like sharper than a razor blade in some cases. And these things are like shark's teeth on these macana swords, and that's what the Aztecs use in close up contact. So these are serious people, and it's just surprising. And I'd always like to know more, because there's not really much, at least I know of, written evidence about what the contract was between Spaniards and the Aztecan warriors. But it's pretty clear that they were promised wealth and of some sort, whether land or slaves or whatever it was. And I think in part, I'm here in Montana, where we have like traditional serious warrior tribes like the Blackfeet. I mean, they're that's deeply embedded in their culture. And I know it was with the Aztecs, because they were war was just a part of their way of life, and blood sacrifice was truly a way of their life. And so I think these like the Aztecan warriors, their capital has just been conquered some years ago, and now they have this chance to be heroes again, and go out and conquer new lands. And they say, okay, count me in. And some of the Aztecan warriors are bringing their wives and children. This is not a small undertaking.
No, it's the scale of it is really quite amazing. And as Chris says, it dwarfs anything that comes out of British America, British colonial America, really up until I don't know, the War of 1812 or something. I mean, the scale of it is fantastic.
The scale,
yeah. So, talk a little bit. Well, first of all, let me just mention, as I wanted to do, that we're chatting today with Peter Stark, who is the author of The Lost Cities of El Norte, Coronado's Quest, The Unconquered West, and the Birth of American Indian Resistance. And so talk to us a little bit, as we think about the birth of Native American resistance, about, and I may not say this word correctly, the Taiguex War.
Yeah, it's really hard to. I've tried to pronounce it for years, but it's still tricky. It's Tiwish.
Tiwish.
Right, if you say so.
Tiwish. I should have read that.
You gotta have to visualize the phonetics.
Right, I should have read that.
And it refers to
talk about that and why you consider it in some ways a native victory, one of the in their fight against the conquistadors.
And let me add on to that, though, because
we don't like to give you just one question. We like to.
Well, it's all
good. Yeah, I got it.
I mean, talk about sort of how the Native Americans respond to this, and how their tactics, the way they fight this war, improves. I mean, they seem to be
that part.
So tie it into the war.
To Rick's question about the Tiwish, which I think it derives from the Tiwa people, who are a prominent Puebloan people in the Rio Grande Valley, along near Albuquerque, north of there, up to Santa Fe. So that's sort of known as the Tiwish area, and so it's now known as the Tiwish War, and it's known to historians who know it at all as the earliest named war between Native people and Europeans in what's now the United States. It's like the first really formal war between natives and Europeans. And so the it's so fascinating, to kind of pick up on Chris's question here about the strategies that what they do. Like I don't want to get too deeply into the plot because I could spend hours there. But they're really good at, in a way, deception, and they're really good at withdrawing, and they've done this for thousands of years. The people there in the Southwest. I mean, you think of Mesa Verde and those fortified places up in the cliffs. So what happens is when Coronado, I'll give you the example about when he shows up. He 6 months from Mexico and Mexico City to Compostela, up the west coast of Mexico, over the Sierra Madre Mountains, which Fray Marcos has described as a little hill. Turns out to be a very big hill. And then up through what's now Sonora in Mexico, into southern Arizona, south of Tucson, and then across this huge barren area called the Des Poblado. And then they come to this place where Fray Marcos has said, here are these 7 wealthy cities. And, like they come over a ridge one day and it's like, they're not 7 wealthy cities. They're like these big stone and adobe pueblos that are, impressive, but they're not glittering. There are no jewels, there are no banners, there are no gold. It's nothing like they're expecting. So they march up to the first pueblo, and by Spanish law at this point, the crown's now trying to be humanitarian after guys like Cortez and Pizarro. So they want to make sure that the native people have a kind of a chance to choose their options. So Coronado, marches up this huge clanking army and toward this pueblo, and the Zuni, the Bo priests are called, come out and they pour a line of cornmeal on the ground. And the Zuni are backed by like 300 or 400 Zuni warriors with bows and arrows. And, it's really clear, like the Zuni are saying, don't cross this line. And Coronado and all his guys are just kind of pushing up against the line. And at this point, by law, Spanish law, Coronado is required to read what's actually called the requirement in Spanish, the requerimiento. And what it says is like, we are, it says, there's God in heaven. He created Adam and Eve. You are children of Adam and Eve. God's representative on earth is the Pope. The King and Queen of Spain are endowed by the Pope with that power. And we are endowed by the King and Queen of Spain. And so here's the deal. This is, this is not a very long contract. And it's really just kind of goes like this. You got 2 options. A, you accept our friars to come among you and teach you, true religion, Christianity, and our way of life. And we will treat you with love and kindness forever. Option B, you resist and we will kill you all and make slaves of your women and children. By law, this has to be read 3 times in Latin. So, here are the Zunis like, okay, what's going on? The point's not getting across. Things get agitated. The Zunis start firing warning arrows. The Spaniards charge. The Zunis retreat to the first pueblo, Hawaku, where the ruins are still today. I've been there. And the Zuni climb up ladders and guard the rooftops. Well, they leave one ladder that's down, and Coronado goes charging up there, and he says, "Okay, here's the ladder." And he's wearing a gilded suit of armor. He leads the charge up this ladder, and he gets partway up, and this avalanche of rocks comes down and knocks him down to the ground. And then he starts up again, and there's it's described in the chronicles as a slab of rock comes flying down and hits him directly on his golden helmet, and bam, he is down at the bottom. He's like crushed, and he's completely unconscious. He's about to die, except his captains, with their suits of armor, throw themselves over his body, drag him away, and then he's knocked out for hours. And then they go and the Spaniards and Aztecans, assault the Pueblo. Well, when they get up to the Pueblo, when they actually get in there, all these Zuni warriors, like, they've evaporated, and there's nothing left in the Pueblo. There are no valuables. There's nothing of value. There's a lot of corn because the Zunis can't take the corn with them. But what's happened? And the Spaniards are saying, what is going on here? What's happened to these people? Well, the Spaniards take the Pueblo, and eventually they send out scouting parties, and they discover that the Zunis have retreated to their traditional stronghold called Dawa Yalane, which means Corn Mountain or Thunder Mountain. And it's this massive mesa that's 1,000 feet high with unscalable cliffs that it has cornfields and water and houses on top. And they can stay there forever, 1,000 feet above the valley, while all these Spaniards are kicking around down below. They have no reason to come down. And the Zuni people and other Puebloans have developed these defensive techniques over hundreds, if not thousands of years. They've been invaded many times by other native people. And so, these are very sophisticated techniques of taking refuge. And then, so the Spaniards are really they don't know what to do. So eventually the Zunis send a delegation, and then eventually a delegation comes from this trading city, Kikuyu, and Coronado, and tells Coronado about these big herds of beasts way to the east on these grassy plains, and oceans that way and rivers that way. And Coronado sends out all these reconnaissance parties, and eventually the reconnaissance parties get to the plains, and they get to a point where plus the first thing the Spaniards ask are like, do you guys have any gold? And Spaniards hold, like with the Zunis and the people from Kikuyu, the Spaniards hold up this little piece of gold, and the Zunis and the Kikuyu people say, they look at it, oh, that, no, we don't have any of that. But if you keep going that way, and you'll find it, just keep going.
Yeah, why do they continue to believe this story?
Right.
So it's like this incredible deception that they run on this dude. And there's a lot of violence in between, because he has to establish winter quarters. These people from Mexico and Spain, these Aztec and other native warriors from the south, these are tropical people. They do not have winter clothes. It's really cold up there on the high desert in the winter. And their supply ship that's supposed to be bringing up the clothes and supplies thinks they're going to rendezvous with the expedition, but turns out the closest point they can get is like 400 miles across the desert at the head of the Gulf of Mexico. So that's where their warm clothes are. So they're freezing, and they have to get winter quarters to house themselves. And that's when the real trouble begins, is when they take over these pueblos, the Spaniards do. And then they start literally snatching bison and turkey feather warm robes off the Puebloan people's backs. And that's what kind of erupts to the first part of the Tijuana War.
Yeah. So there's so much here, and I have some passages that I just love. You talked about the expedition as it travels north being a ship floating on the vast ocean of the mysterious north, and you can just kind of picture these guys, and they get to a point, and when you buy the book and read it, you'll get more details on this. But you say that Coronado kind of enters his own heart of darkness there, and he has to basically say, no gold, some great vistas, but not going to happen.
And the Puebloans, or the people that the Puebloans set him up with as guides, lead him as far as almost to Iowa.
Well, that's again,
You know, somebody from Kansas is on. I heard you say. I mean, it's northern Kansas, just short of Iowa. And I mean, one of the kind of huge ironies of the story is the Spaniards were not only looking for gold, but there was serious money to be had in claiming fertile lands, because what they did in Mexico and elsewhere, the Spaniards would claim native land as fertile, and they'd make essentially slaves of the native people to work these lands called encomiendas. So you could set yourself up as like a baron by capturing these lands. So they're looking for fertile lands. Well, in the desert Southwest, they weren't finding anything like that. No gold, no fertile lands. And they hear there's gold, just keep going north, northwest. And they get, looking for this gold before, everything literally turned south. They get up to northern Kansas. And I think one of the huge ironies of this is they are just like a few days journeys short of southern Iowa. And southern Iowa has some of the most richest and fertile lands in the entire world. I mean, it is literally gold. It's covered with corn. And Coronado stops just short of there. And that's another crazy story too.
Right. Well, I just oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just, as they follow like north, I just, in my mind, I was just picturing a Mel Brooks movie with all these indigenous people going, oh, tell them another one. They'll keep going. And then
it was like that. Yeah.
It's amazing.
No, I wanted to just mention, because he made a comment here, Ken Hattrop, who both Chris and I know, says there's a hill just north of Lindsborg, Kansas, known as Coronado Heights. And allegedly they found chainmail nearby, and possibly it was a place that Coronado reached on his journey. And so, as Chris mentioned, Coronado turns back, and let's not get into the details. That's a great story, and Peter tells it really well. And let's leave something right to be discovered by reading the book. But they decide to turn back, but they have a plan to come back. They are going to come back and colonize what is now Kansas and head east from there. Now, that's going to lead them to the kind of places that you're suggesting. And they don't do that because something's happened to them on the way. But intriguingly, you have theorized about an alternate history, that this mission could have turned out very differently from what it did. Can you sketch that out for us a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I love doing that, and of course it's speculation, and this is what
sure. This is Peter Stark history here, not actual history.
Not actual history, but these are real places and have real potential that they could have captured as wealth, and they didn't. So if they'd gone just a few days travel north, they'd get to these incredibly rich farmlands, and which would be very valuable.
And they'd know they were rich farmlands, presumably because they're being farmed by the natives.
Well, the natives are growing corn, but these would be big, like tall grass prairie, very, very fertile, lands. And even in when they got to Kansas and, farther east and north in Kansas, the journals, the Spaniards' journals, are saying, wow, this is fantastic land. I mean, some of them are saying this is as good as any land I've seen in Spain. I know of in Spain. And that's even short of Iowa. If they'd gone due east for, it'd be a few weeks travel, they would have got to what's known as Cahokia. And it's a right across the Mississippi River from St. Louis. And this was an ancient center of a very large civilization, sometimes called the Mississippian people. And there were other centers in the southeast and elsewhere in the Mississippi Valley, but Cahokia was massive. And the ruins today, there are these mounds. You can't not believe the size of these earthen mounds and the ceremonial sites. And Cahokia was the center of a very large network of, whether you call it a civilization, a network of different societies. It was a wealthy and very widespread society, and that if it was exactly what the conquistadors were looking for, it would be like, another Aztec capital or another Incan capital. If they had got to Cahokia, they would be able to, you hear it in contemporary war terms, they'd be able to, like cut off the head of the snake, capture the hierarchy. There's obviously a hierarchy in these very dense cities of leadership hierarchy. They'd be able to capture like the equivalent of the emperor of Cahokia and the people who really ran it. And they could have got wiped out too, but the Spaniards could have, but they could potentially have conquered that whole center of the Mississippi Valley, this big widespread Mississippian culture. And that would have given them control of a very large swath of rich lands, not gold, but land. I mean, really rich lands. And the big problem, one of the big problems was that the supply line back to Mexico City was, it was like a year or more, and over very rough terrain and that's from the Southwest, even farther from Kansas. But if they'd got to Cahokia, a few hundred miles away, they'd be on the Mississippi River. And they would then have a supply line directly down to Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America, whatever we're calling it. And so they'd have a supply line directly down there. And the Spaniards would be able to support like a colony, and I think a widespread colony if they needed to, using that supply, easy transport up the Mississippi.
So why do you think it is? I mean, I clearly one of the things that comes out of this book is this is a great indigenous victory, because not only do they turn back this expedition, but it's several hundred years before anybody comes back. Why do you think, though, that more people aren't kind of rushing to fill that vacuum? Because the few survivors of the expedition get back there, write about what they saw. They didn't reach the really rich, fertile lands, but they saw all this land. They saw the buffalo herds. I mean, somebody had to be saying, like, there's something out there.
Yeah,
but it just seems to just go silent.
That's a really good question. And I kind of hypothesize or describe what I call a Puebloan blockade. That these Puebloan societies were close-knit, very sophisticated, and they had the means of stopping Spaniards coming up or really messing with them like they did with Coronado. And so I think that's one thing that kept further Spanish expeditions out of there. I think it was really 60 or 80 years before anybody even tried to get up there. The Spaniards eventually founded a small, they called it Nueva Mexico, and they founded a small settlement at what's today Santa Fe, and it was like a fort and a religious settlement, but it was small, and they claimed all that territory. The Spaniards did for a couple hundred years, but claiming it as one thing and actually controlling it is a whole different thing, which they did not really control. And at one point in the Pueblo Revolt, the Puebloan people kicked them all out, killed the entire Spanish population, 3,000, killed them or drove them out. And so the Puebloans really were actually in control. And then, I mean, one of the really interesting speculations of the historical arc of North America that I make is that I think, in my mind, that Puebloan blockade kept the Spaniards from seriously colonizing what's now the American West. And because, I mean, really, they had a little settlement in Santa Fe, and that was it. And for the whole, this whole end of the continent, the whole half of the continent. And so the Puebloans kept the Europeans out and the Spaniards. And then eventually the Comanche Empire grew large, and that kept other settlers out, coming out. And finally, so there was no European colonization or military to speak of in the whole West, literally. And so it's kind of part of my hypothesis that in part enabled the United States, when it got rolling in the westward movement in the early 1800s, to blow right through there because there were no Europeans to oppose them. I mean, there was a token Spanish presence, but not much. And so and there were, of course, Native Americans. But, it took, there's a kind of crazy fact, but it took British and U.S. settlement, let's see, what did I say, 200 years to go from the East Coast, like Jamestown or Plymouth, 200 years to go from the East Coast to the Mississippi River. That's how far. And it barely got there in 200 years to the Mississippi River. This is British or American or white, U.S. settlement. In less than 50 years, U.S. settlement got all the way from the Mississippi River to the West Coast. And if there had been a stronger European presence out there, that would not have happened in life.
Yeah. Well, fascinating things to think about. Peter Stark, thank you so much for joining us today. Peter. Yeah, Peter is the author of the book, The Lost Cities of El Norte, Coronado's Quest, The Unconquered West, and the Birth of American Indian Resistance. I did resist the urge, Peter, to grab my class of 76 yearbook, which is right there.
Because only Rick still has this class.
And show your picture, which I did look at.
You have it?
Okay, I don't have to resist.
See, only Rick would keep his yearbook from
here. Oh my God.
The
Aegis of 76, right?
Yeah.
That's the yearbook. And let's see if we can.
It was a bicentennial.
Yeah. Yes, it was. I do remember that. Okay. And he is here. I don't know. It's hard to do this backwards, but am I getting it? Can you see him?
We have to say
me down in the right down below. Yeah. The lower row. Yeah.
Yeah. Peter Stark.
Which one, Rick?
Well, I can't. I'm holding this up to the camera.
Well, you look at the names and then hold it up.
Okay, fine. Hang on. Right. We're going rogue right here.
Okay,
lower right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
I was young and
he's right there. He's right there.
Young and energetic then. Yeah, there he is.
In the middle with my mic blocking the way there. I can't figure it out.
All right.
Those are really 1970s.
Oh, there we go. There he is.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that does look like me, kind of.
Okay, that's close. That's enough. So you can complain to the publicist, Peter. They treated me badly. I'm so sorry.
No, I feel good. I went back for my 50th reunion. It was really fun. I really felt reconnected to start with.
Mine is a year and a half, 2 years away.
Yeah,
so
dude,
I'm looking forward to it. Peter, thanks so much for joning us.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Read the book, guys. It's great.
Yeah, the book is terrific. Take a look at it. Well done. And you'll like it. I don't know. People say to me, you'll like something immediately. I won't like it.
Yeah, no, but
they should like it.
Yeah. I said before the show started, this isn't a topic that generally gets me that interested, but it was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. You'll discover a lot of great things, and it's wonderfully written. So yeah, check it out.
So next week.
Yes.
We're live again.
We are.
We'll talk with Rory Campbell about his book, A Rebel and a Traitor. I'm trying to bring it up here, and there it is. Oh, yeah. A Rebel and a Traitor, A Fugitive, The Manhunt, and the Birth of the IRA. It's the story of a British diplomat who joined the Irish Rebellion. Now, he might have been an Irish-British diplomat. I'm guessing he was Irish in background.
It's complex, but
I know, but not that complex for you.
Well, I approach it with an open eye. No, but it's timely. It's timely because in a week or so, I'm going to Ireland to recce a trip, hopefully next year.
Fantastic!
So it's
on the Easter Rebellion or on earlier or later
that's
history.
What I'm going to work on. The tentative title now is From Revolution to Republic. So I just have to
Okay.
decide which Irish Revolution to start the story at.
Well, we look
So-
forward to all of the places that you might visit on that trip and hearing
Absolutely.
about it. And I'm sure many of our viewers are ready to get online for it.
I'll be posting pictures accordingly.
There you go. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon, and browse historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.